Well, everyone, Exilecon is come and gone, and we have a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. I am Mr. Totebag, and I wanted to do this video sooner, but I was delayed by real life. I work a 9 to 5, and this past Monday, the East Coast got slammed by storms that left us without power for most of the week. Sitting by candlelight in the evening, I had plenty of time to think about what I want this channel to be. It would be reasonable to say that Path of Exile is my favorite game of all time. It's certainly the game I've played the most. And while I don't want this to become a PoE channel exclusively, I think you'll see a stronger emphasis on it as we move forward. I'm also going to be playing with different video formats until I find my groove. I want to thank you all for being here with me as I hopefully improve the quality of my content. Now, on to Exilecon. I've watched most of the footage multiple times, and for this video, I'm going to watch some of it again and give my 2 cents on everything that was revealed about PoE 2. I figure there are plenty of essay-type videos on the subject, and I prefer to be more laid back, so let's give this a try. First, the trailer. Okay, let's do it.
The gods caused all this, you know. After Oriath was destroyed, I traveled.
Yeah, so that looks like Sarn, and it's been destroyed. Although I'm wondering if the damage was caused by the gods during PoE 1, or if it's a new set of gods, because in PoE 1, you sort of go through the second half of the story and kill all of the gods. And I wasn't under the impression that they'd done a bunch of damage everywhere, but you know what? It would make sense that they did. You really don't cut through the same zones in the back half of the campaign, and so it's possible that during all of this, as you're going down and killing the gods one at a time, they're just wreaking havoc until you put a stop to them.
Traveled, searching for answers. Everywhere I went, the same divine devastation. It must end.
And she looks sort of like a sort of zealous inquisitor type, almost like the Oriathan Templar or whoever it was that exiled you in the first place, but they were all killed. Now, I will say that guy in the back, his staff has the symbol of Baran the Crusader on it, so maybe this is like a faction of the Crusaders who are coming behind you and trying to clean up your mess, even if it means, you know, killing you and a bunch of other people in the process.
I will end it, and no exile will stop me.
Well, so doubling the number of character classes, I think, is a really good idea. You know, we could have done 3 more ascendancies for the first original 6 character classes, which I think was the plan originally. But, you know, sort of breaking up the classes and giving them a stronger identity in terms of just their visual archetype and the types of skills and stuff that would be traditionally associated with them is a good idea. But based on what I've seen, you're still going to be able to mix and match anything you want, as you always can. It's more of, I think it's to give you a stronger place to start. To say, you know, I'm going to start with this character, and these are the types of skills they would normally use, and that is more clear cut. But if you want to paint outside the lines, you absolutely can, which is, you know, a staple of PoE. So that's cool. And I mean, just look at this boss design. I mean, this is so far above anything that PoE had. I mean, PoE has some pretty awesome bosses, but you really sort of get a sense of menace and gothic horror a little bit out of this. It almost looks like a Dark Souls boss. I loathe to make the comparison because I know it's worn out its welcome 5 years ago, but it really does remind me of that a little bit. You can also see the production value is way better in terms of the lead up to the boss fights. The fact that you have what is essentially a cutscene. PoE doesn't really have anything like that, unless that's just the introduction. But I'm getting the sense that this is going to be a little bit more. There's going to be more of a focus on storytelling in PoE 2. everybody see the exploding zombie? Can't go without that. Like every game with undead needs an exploding zombie. There he is. Yeah.
This world will be reborn, no matter the cost.
Who's the kid in the painting? I don't know who that's supposed to be. Yes, and this amount of content that they're saying with 100 distinct environments is absolutely insane. They said 240 active skill gems. I think PoE 1 has a little bit more than that right now, but based on some of the other stuff I've seen, which I'll be talking about here shortly, the combination of different skills and the build variety and possible combinations is so far beyond that anything that PoE 1 has that I think that overall it's going to be starting from a much stronger place in terms of content and variety and just things to do, ways to build your character, which is what keeps most of us, at least me, it keeps me coming back every league because I essentially never play the same build twice. An excellent trailer. I'll be cutting over to actually the gameplay demonstration here in just a minute. Alright, I've watched this 3 times. A 4th one won't kill me.
Welcome to Path of Exile 2. We'd like to start off by showing some of the gameplay of Act 3, one of the 6 acts in PoE 2's campaign. We're starting here in the jungle depths. Act 3 is set in the ruins of the Vaal civilization, which fell thousands of years ago. Jungle has taken over their former once great cities, and we'll be exploring it using one of our 6 new character classes, called the Monk. In PoE 1, we had one character.
I don't know if everybody caught it, but a couple of those monsters dropped gold. Yes, they've added gold to PoE 2 because they said they tried an event with it. It was like Ruthless with gold, where it would drop gold instead of just the standard currencies for crafting, because they said that it kind of feels bad when you kill a bunch of monsters and they don't drop anything. So even picking up gold is really sort of psychologically satisfying, which is why it has worked in games for so long. And they said that in order to have something to spend gold on, they're going to, there's going to be more of an emphasis in PoE 2 on buying gear from vendors to fill the gaps in your build as you're leveling. Because the vendors will have way more available to you than they do in PoE 1.
Character class for each of the combinations of strength, dexterity, and intelligence. When looking at the design of PoE 2, though, we realized that many of the new skills that we were trying to design just didn't really fit thematically with the existing classes that we have. Being a spellcaster with a bear form makes sense for Strength Int, but it doesn't really sound like something that a Templar would do. We realized that since we had new mechanics for every attribute combination, it actually made sense to design new character classes to explore the new themes. In PoE 2, every attribute combination has 2 classes associated with it. Strength Int has the Templar or the Druid, on Dexterity you have the Ranger or the more spear-focused Huntress, and on Dex Int you have the Shadow and the Monk, which Mark is playing here. Each class has its own 3 ascendancies that let you further specialize the class in the way that only that class has access to. But
they never really mention it, but I guess the Scion's just going away completely, which I'm fine with. It's like the least played class, jack of all trades. It's the easiest character to screw up, and you don't really get anything from her ascendancy that you can't get from everywhere else. In fact, that's the point, is that she takes little bits of different ascendancies, and it never really works. It never really comes together. There are very few Scion builds that are worth playing. So again, I think it goes back to each character class sort of having an identity, even if you do decide to break out of that identity.
They both start at the same location in the passive tree. The quest rewards you're offered on the 2 variants are tailored to the class, but of course, this is PoE. You can still mix and match anything to your heart's content. Looks like we've come across the boss for this area. In PoE 2, every area of the campaign contains a boss of at least this difficulty. That's over 100 bosses to fight as you make your way through the campaign, and they all have unique mechanics to learn. As you've seen from watching Mark fighting, the melee combat in PoE 2 has a very different feel than before. We've done a lot of things to add mobility to combat. Practically every melee skill in PoE 2 has some kind of movement built into it. But the monk in particular is a melee fighter who specializes in mobility over brute strength.
Yeah, so I think that that's interesting. That's something I wanted to talk about, is how a lot of the melee attacks have sort of an engage or disengage mobility built into it, and I think it makes a lot of sense. For the longest time, the complaint's been melee is like, the best melee skills still have range to them. Lightning strike or frost blades or stuff that still shoots out projectiles and clears for you. But with none of the upsides that spellcasting has, like you still have to get in close to do any real damage to single target, and you're more vulnerable. So having melee skills that sort of get you in and out of combat as part of them, I think is a good thing. I know that this footage looks like the combat looks slower than what we're probably used to with the zoom of Path of Exile. But they did say that, this is only Act 3 of a 6-act campaign. And they did say that the demo that they played for Exilecon was sort of overtuned to slow things down. The characters didn't have very good gear, that kind of thing, so that you could see more of the mechanics on display clearly. Because if you're moving too fast, you can't see anything. It's visual clutter. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
So, as Mark has been playing, you might have noticed these blue...
And you just sit here with me and be quiet, okay? Let's just chill for a minute, okay? Can you just chill for a minute? I'd appreciate it.
markers over enemies. Mark has a skill equipped called Killing Palm. Whenever an enemy has a blue indicator over it, it means that the monster has low enough life to cull with Killing Palm. Successfully executing the cull will give you a power charge. This is an important skill for the monk.
So I like that. I like the idea of sort of conditional, like it says calling palm, so I would assume calling strike is built into it as long as the conditions are met, and the fact that it gives you a power charge. It's not quite a like a generator spender type resource, but it's more of, it's a way to establish almost a combo of skills and attacks, and I think that that's really solid. Although they did say they don't want characters to end up on like a skill rotation like an MMO. It's more of chaining stuff together as the situation requires, which is good. Like there should be some freedom with that, because right now PoE is basically taking one skill, one damage type, and just going all in on it, which is fine. But I think that, and as we see more of this, it'll become clearer that PoE 2 is going to be about more variety in your skills and in your builds.
Since many of his skills interact with power charges. One of the great things about the skill is that it has a built-in dash forward, which makes it much easier to target the skill at the right point when you need it. We've done a lot of work in PoE 2 to make using skills like this feel satisfying. If you're accidentally targeting slightly off the monster, the skill will automatically lock on to the cullable target, and will even do a small amount of pathfinding around obstacles. We really want to make sure that when you've got an opportunity to use the skill, nothing is going to get in your way. Once you have some power charges, you need some skills to power up. A great follow-up is Falling Thunder. Falling Thunder without a power charge just creates a relatively small lightning AoE in front of you. But do it with some power charges and it turns into a pack clearer with a large number of extra projectiles. One thing you'll notice here is that like almost every melee skill in PoE 2, Falling Thunder has a bit of extra movement built in just in case you need it. Using the skill within range and you'll do a flip in place, but use it at a larger range and your character will move forward while executing it, getting you into position without any time penalty.
The animations are much smoother and much prettier as well. I know that a lot of work went into that. I think I think I saw a video where they said they redid the entire rigs for all the characters, which is that is not a small amount of work by any stretch of the imagination. So, good on the animation team.
In PoE 2 you also get a short period to redirect your target. Notice how you can start the skill facing one way, then whip the mouse sideways to land the skill in a different direction? In order to get power charges, you're going to first need to get some lower life monsters into a cullable range. You've got a few options. If you want to charge right in, Whirling Assault is a good option. It doesn't do much damage per hit, but it covers a lot of ground. And notice how you can turn as you do it? Generally speaking, you never lose control of your character in PoE 2. If you make a turn at the right time, you can get a couple of extra hits in on the monsters, getting them into range of your cull. Follow up with a Killing Palm, then finish off the rest of the pack with your Falling Thunder. We've now entered the Vaal Mechanarium. This is the place where the Vaal
Oh, look at the art for that waypoint. I want that in my hideout. Oh, you know what? I wonder how that's going. You know, they didn't. I don't think they mentioned hideouts during Exilecon, so I'm curious about that.
The various constructs they relied on to power their civilization.
Now this is a find! A Vaal ruin that hasn't been looted? I wonder why nobody's been in here before.
One useful feature that we've added is the ability to call in NPCs to where you are, to give you more information, help you with quest objectives, and so that you don't have to always go back to town. In this case, we'll call in Alva to find out what to do.
I think that's really cool, although I think that in action RPGs, it's important to have times where you should go back to town. I think that it helps prevent the burnout and breaks up the pacing a little bit. I think that it's actually, in terms of quality of life, something Torchlight did really well was sending your pet back to sell stuff and like that so you could just keep on grinding. But I also think that it is important to have downtime where you're just kind of looking through your stuff and chilling and doing what you need to do before you hop right back in. It's also kind of unrelated, but the reason why the game Fear works so well, First Encounter Assault Recon, is because you have these super intense gunfights that are then broken up by these moments of slow-paced horror. And again, like changing the pacing that way and sort of going back and forth almost between genres is something that tends to help keep a game experience fresh as you progress through it.
This mechanism, if powered with a small soul core, it could open that door. There should definitely be soul cores somewhere around here. They had to power these constructs somehow.
As Alpha said,
now, it's cool that they brought back Alva, and I'm wondering how many of the other NPCs are coming back. This is 20 years, I think, after the end of PoE, so everyone's going to be a little bit older, wiser, tougher, maybe? We'll see. The character classes are not meant to be, based on my understanding, they're not meant to be the same characters that you played in PoE 1. They are separate characters of the same and new classes.
we need to find a soul core to open this door. Let's explore. If you want to shave off some life without getting too close to some of the more dangerous monsters, a good option is Wind Blast. Wind Blast also doesn't do too much damage, but it keeps the enemies back. The closer they are, the farther they're pushed back, so it's a great option.
That's me after I eat too much Mexican food. I have that Wind Blast and it pushes people back and does a little bit of damage to them.
Option for keeping smaller, but high damage enemies at bay. Note that the bigger the enemy is, the less they'll be pushed back, so trying to push back some giants isn't going to be effective. And there's the soul core. Let's get back to the door.
Your fate is sealed.
Notice the animation when actually interacting with something instead of just clicking and everything just happening. The character actually reached out with the object and placed it. I think that gives a little bit more weight to everything you're doing. Although it may slow down, the speedrunners by a few seconds, which, sorry everybody, you'll be okay.
Best. I'll keep investigating in here. Bring me in if you find anything else.
If you need to defeat tougher enemies, it might be time to break out some of the ice skills in the monk's arsenal. Glacial Cascade creates a wave of ice that moves slowly in front of the player. It's pretty ineffective against fast-moving monsters because most of the damage occurs right at the end of the wave, and so a lot of monsters will just walk right by it. But if you can find a way to make a monster stop at just the right place, it can be very effective. In order to do that, you probably want to freeze monsters. The monk has a few different tools to do this. A fairly simple option is to get right in the monster's face with Ice Strike. Ice Strike doesn't do too much damage on the first 2 hits, but attack 3 times in sequence and you can get off a combo that has a much higher chance to freeze. Get in there with that freeze, then roll back and finish the job with a Glacial Cascade. Now, remember how Glacial Cascade had that extra damaging spike at the end? If you've hit a frozen enemy with that spike, it shatters the ice on the enemy and does a devastating amount of damage.
So that's a new thing too. I think that it's been a while since I played with Glacial Cascade, because that is a PoE 1 skill. Right now, it does have the aspect of doing damage at the end of it, more damage at the end, and with the last spikes that come out of the ground. But this, doing extra damage against enemies who are frozen, I think that's a new thing for this skill. So I'm glad to see that existing skills are getting reworks and obvious visual touch-ups to be brought over into PoE 2, because there's so much good that's already there that is completely usable, even if it just needs some tweaking, that can give them a strong foundation to work from.
Oh yeah, I just casually mentioned rolling back before. Did I forget to mention that in PoE 2 we added a dodge roll to every character? Just press spacebar at any time to roll. There's no cooldown, no limitations. It even has a bit.
No cooldown, no limitations. Wonder where else that could be put into place where it would benefit a game. Oh well.
Of built-in pathfinding so you don't get stuck on things. When you dodge roll, you're not invulnerable. If something hits you, you're going to feel it, but most things will not hit you. That's because while rolling, projectiles and melee strikes will always miss. You'll have to roll out of the way of a slam that has AoE, but anyone swinging a sword or throwing a fireball is going to miss. Now, another really important function of the dodge roll is that it lets you cancel out of almost any skill at any time. This makes it so you don't feel like you're getting stuck doing a long animation when something is about to hit you. It really changes how skills with longer attack and cast times play, and it makes dodge roll feel like a very reliable way to avoid attacks. So, that's one way to get out of the way of damage, but the monk specializes in mobility, so it makes sense that he would have a few more. Wave of Frost is one of our new attacks with a retreat built right in. You move backwards and throw out a cold attack with a significant freeze. The great thing about this is it puts you at a good distance to follow up with Glacial Cascade and do a whole pile of damage. Hey look, another Soul Core.
He did mention using an ice attack and then following it up with Glacial Cascade, which is a spell. And I've seen some elements here that we'll be seeing shortly that make me think that it's going to be more effective in PoE 2 to combine skill types and damage types. I would like to see what is going to be done to allow more hybrid builds where you can combine attacks and spells and not have one type suffer compared to the other.
Another skill you can use to get some extra freeze is Shattering Palm. Shattering Palm is another palm strike that puts a small ice bomb on your target. Kill or deal enough damage to the target and the bomb will explode, doing some damage and a significant freeze. It's a great option against...
I mean, I love the idea of building a super fast monk with a bunch of different palm strike skills where I can just get in and beat the holy hell out of stuff and then get back out again.
Bosses, where the wave of ice might not be enough to get that freeze off, but you really want to get that Glacial Cascade damage bonus.
Get back! Face your demise.
final skill we're going to show you today is Flicker Strike. It's a monk skill now, and another skill that consumes power charges. If you've played PoE 1,
Flicker players are, I don't know if they're happy or absolutely devastated that Flicker Strike now spends power charges instead of frenzy charges. Maybe it'll be a more viable, easy to get up and running build, because Flicker right now it's kind of expensive and it takes a while before it really feels good. Kind of feels like garbage until you have some really reliable charge generation, and even then I think it ends up being fairly squishy.
you know what to expect. It's a great finisher for tough boss fights, and it looks pretty impressive too.
Face your demise.
Another door. I wonder what could be in there.
I don't think they mention it explicitly, but you'll notice there are like checkpoint little torches that light up blue, and I'm betting that in front of boss, I think I saw one in front of the other boss fight, so there may be these before each boss fight so that you don't have to do a lot of running back or open up a portal necessarily before you begin each boss fight, which is nice. It's a little quality of life thing.
In order to take down this boss, we're going to need all the tools in the monk's arsenal, especially the combo of Freeze and Glacial Cascade. If you're a PoE 1 player, you might think that you can't really rely on Freeze because there's so many bosses that are immune to it, but in PoE 2, that's changing significantly. In PoE 1, Freeze is a binary mechanic. An attack freezes the target, or it doesn't. What this basically means is that in PoE 1, we were forced to add freeze immunity to many bosses, because freeze just trivialized them. Because of that, freezing was something you only really used while pack clearing, and not something you could rely on as a core part of your build for boss fight. In PoE 2 though, all crowd control mechanics now have internal meters that allow you to build up to a freeze or stun, or whatever other CC mechanic you might be using. It's a little bit like poise from games like Elden Ring, though the meters tend to be a lot smaller than those games. When you freeze an enemy, it increases the amount of freeze you need to do another freeze, but the increased difficulty bleeds away slowly. More freeze will always let you freeze the boss more often, but this system means it will not get out of control in party play or interact badly with other CC mechanics, allowing us to let these kinds of mechanics actually work against all bosses.
Which, you know, it sounds like a sort of technical in the weeds type thing, but the idea that you can now freeze or crowd control even bosses is so important, because if you create an entire character and build it around your ability to freeze and chill stuff, and then you can't do it against the toughest monsters, you kind of feel like you've wasted a bunch of effort, and that particular portion of your build is less effective, and it's not a good feeling. It's not good to invest in something then have it sort of just not work when you need it most. So I think that this is a very much improved system for crowd control. This boss has got a hell of a life pool. I know I said that everything was overtuned, and it was for this demo, according to GGG, according to the devs, but man, he's just wailing on this boss.
Face your demise.
Blackjaw has dropped a consumable quest item, the Flame Core. It's a permanent +10 to Spirit. In PoE 2, we really want to make sure that you feel rewarded for exploration. It wouldn't be much good if we made all these awesome optional bosses if we didn't have something great to find for killing them. One of the things you might find for killing a boss is a permanent stat bonus to your character.
Yeah, so that's awesome. They're basically altars of Lilith, only they have an actual fight attached to them. It's not just you having to jam yourself into every little dead-end corner of the map in order to find something that is not really measurable. Yeah, having +10 to like a resist or something like that it can make all the difference in PoE. And I think they'll talk about what Spirit does here in just a second.
Head comes. Your fate is sealed.
In order to help us with this next area, we're going to call in a sorceress. Mark's friend Octavian is going to send a friendvite, which we're going to accept, and then they can play together. The sorceress is the new intelligence-focused character in PoE 2. While the witch focuses more on occult magic and summoning, the sorceress is themed around pure elemental destruction. Let's have a look at how she plays.
All the vaunted technology of the Val, and look where it got them. Dead and buried.
This is the largest soul core I've ever seen. With this, we could power the canal systems. But it isn't charged. There is still latent energy in this machinarium from its ancient operation. These lines in the stonework should lead to generators. You might need to find some more soul cores to spin them up, but everything looks to be in surprisingly decent condition. Maybe the golems have been maintaining it. In any case, it should still function. We'll have to remove that large core from the wall, of course, but that shouldn't be a problem.
We have some skills here that you'll probably recognize if you've played PoE 1 before, but they feel a bit different to play now. Spark is great in these tight passages since it bounces around. We've added a Pierce support gem to really allow it to hit an entire...
The spell effects are so good. I mean, everything looks so much better. I don't know if I said that, but yeah, just the move to PBR, physically based rendering, is just, it's the right move for pretty much everything at this point if you're looking for high fidelity visuals.
...entire room of targets. For a more single target focused skill, Arc is a good choice. It does more damage to the first target you hit. Now, if you find yourself surrounded, it might be good to use Ice Nova. It hits all enemies around you and slows them down with chill. Just be careful. Getting up close and personal isn't the ideal place for a sorceress to be. She doesn't have the defenses of a more melee-oriented character. If you want to help with the sorceress...
You know, he never elaborates on that, but I wonder what that means exactly. I'm wondering if there's some sort of... I mean, obviously from the tree and some other stuff, I feel like melee-oriented characters will have easier access to larger amounts of armor and tanky defenses, but I'm wondering if there's some sort of implicit defense tied to melee characters that we are not yet aware of, that they haven't mentioned yet. That's pure conjecture on my part, but you never know. something that people have been asking for a long time, is to give melee players basically a chance.
Sorceress's weak melee defense, though, you could use Arctic Armor. In PoE 2, Arctic Armor is a buff that builds up as you stand still. You can see the ice crystals forming around the character. They'll drop off if you walk. When monsters hit you, they take cold damage and build up to a freeze, so it's a great defense. Just be careful. You have to be standing still for a little while to get the full effect, so trying to stutter step isn't the best strategy. Now, Arctic Armor is an ongoing buff, but did you notice it didn't reserve any mana? How does that work? Well, we were pretty sick of the fact that in PoE 1 basically every character was playing with no mana pool, so we decided to change the way that reservation works. There's a new resource in PoE 2 called Spirit. Spirit is a dedicated resource you can use for ongoing effects like Arctic Armor, Heralds, Auras, or even Minions. Everyone starts with 100 Spirit, which is enough for most ongoing effects. But if you want more than one effect, you're going to need some more Spirit. Spirit is available on mods from items and on the passive tree, but if you're willing to give up your offhand slot, the easiest way to get it is by holding a scepter.
So that's something they talked about too, is actually using Spirit on minions. There's now like no cap on the number of zombies you can have and other minions, as long as you have the Spirit to keep raising them or resurrecting them, spawning them, whatever you want to call it. So theoretically, you could just keep bumping up your Spirit cap as high as you can get it, and just have like an army of zombies following you around. That sounds really cool. I did notice that I think Spirit is on the right-hand bar above your mana, which makes me wonder if Rage is still a thing. I hope that it is. Maybe it's it's not visible unless you have some. But I hope that Rage doesn't go away. I hope that that's a thing that's still in PoE 2, because I like Rage as a mechanic. And yeah, having Spirit, and they talked about how Spirit was important because in PoE 1, every skill, you basically build around one skill and one damage type right now for most builds. And so almost every damaging skill needs to be spammable, which means that the mana cost of them needs to be somewhat normalized, which is how most builds end up, unless you're Mind Over Matter or Archmage or something. Most of the builds end up reserving the majority of their mana, and they're still fine to cast their spells all day long. And so I think that moving to this Spirit system and leaving players' mana pools available is a way for them to give different spells varying mana costs and to make it worth it. And you say, hey, do I really want to spend all the mana for this large wind-up but super powerful spell or attack, or do I want to, take it easy for a few seconds and let my mana build back up, instead of it just being, I have one skill and I use it all the time, 10 times a second, and I never run out of mana. It's more of a, you have to worry about your resources a little bit more, and again, lends itself to variety in terms of builds, which is what all this seems to be doing.
Now, if you want to increase the cold damage you're dealing, you can use a Frost Bomb. It places a bomb on the ground that reduces the enemy's cold resistance while it's ticking down. It's a great opportunity to use some cold skills before it explodes. And speaking of cold skills, a great skill to use on monsters with the slower cold resistance is Comet. This is a new skill in PoE 2, and it hits pretty damn hard. It costs a lot of mana and has a really long cast time, but it's worth the wait. It does a devastating amount of damage.
That Comet is an absolute beast of a skill, and I can't wait to play with it. I just want to rain shit from the sky on everybody's heads, and for everything to be shattered and nothing to be left.
To help get you out of danger, your character moves back slightly as it casts. It's pretty hard to hit a fast-moving opponent, but it's great on tougher enemies that stand still, or even a larger pack if you're further away and can predict where they're going to move. Now, if you run out of mana casting too many of those, I guess in an emergency you could cast your free-to-cast Fireball. Where did that come from, you ask? Well, this is a great opportunity to explain the way we've changed caster weapons in PoE 2. Now, in PoE 1, caster weapons had a default melee attack that nobody used, and because they had that, they also had a bunch of attack mods that would spawn in them that...
At least he's honest about that. Your basic attack, nobody uses it after you kill the very first zombie on the beach, on the Twilight Strand, and pick up your first skill gem. There's no point. It serves no purpose. While he's got the inventory open, I would like to point out, and this is something that I've noticed through all of the footage, is that the gear seems to be more unified in terms of how it looks. Now, I feel like there's still the possibility for you to end up looking like a hobo if you're mixing and matching gear of different sort of classes. But everything so far looks a lot nicer than in PoE 1. Not just visually, but in terms of how it all goes together and forms an overall look to your character instead of these things that, like, even the items that, all the base armor items that are just armor, red sockets in PoE, even when you're wearing them, you're like, man, these look like garbage when you put them together. They don't look good. They don't create a look that's just like a bunch of crap slapped on the character, essentially. Part of that's just due to the game's age. That happens. But I'm glad to see that we're seeing some improvements to that. A lot of improvements.
That were useless to a caster. In PoE 2, we wanted to clean that up. So now each staff comes with a built-in free-to-cast spell. Just put it on and spam to your heart's content. Now this particular staff is the base type that you get right on the starting beach, and it's quite likely that you're going to outgrow it. So that's why we have a lot of staves with more utility-focused powers for casters to use. Here we have a crystal staff. It's got a pretty cool built-in spell called Unleash. Using it slams.
So that's cool too, having Unleash built into an item instead of having it, like, it doesn't need to be a support gem necessarily, like it can be, but I've always liked the idea of having multiple ways to get a gameplay mechanic out of something, instead of just being like, this is the one place you have to go for it, because it does sort of limit your approach to things. So yeah, that's cool.
Your staff on the ground, and will allow you to triple cast whatever you cast with your next spell. Now of course you're probably going to want to use that with something powerful, and Comet is a great option.
Yeah. Yep.
You'll notice that Unleash is one of the few skills in PoE 2 with a cooldown. In general, we really try to avoid using cooldowns because we really hate the feeling that combat is just waiting to be able to use your next skill. But it does make sense.
Look, I don't want to be that guy, but, and I've played Diablo 4 off and on since launch. I played a character pre-league, and I have a character in the first league or season as well. And yeah, the idea that you're just kind of waiting for your skills to go off of cooldown, or you are like regenerating your resource by using one of your piddly basic skills to build your resource back up. It can be really painful sometimes, and it's something I'm glad to see PoE 2 is not doing. Yeah, I don't want to do, like, I can do a separate video talking about that. But overall, the way PoE, mechanically, how PoE has always handled a lot of things like that has always been really solid in my mind.
For Unleash, since it's free to cast, and it's something we want you to be using situationally anyway. Now, if you're facing something tough, you might want to try out Mana Tempest. Mana Tempest creates a circle of power in which your character literally hovers over the ground. While in the circle, your mana drains, but it powers up all of your spells. Lightning projectiles fork, beams chain further, and you'll also do a lot more damage. So with all of these skills, here's a great combo to try. First, cast Frostbomb to reduce the target's cold resistance. Then use Mana Tempest to increase your damage. Follow it with Unleash, and then triple cast the Comet to do a truly insane amount of damage.
I need more time.
This rare monster dropped an uncut gem. This is a good opportunity to talk about how skill gems drop in PoE 2. Instead of dropping specific gems, you can find uncut gems. Just right-click on them and pick whatever skill you want. The gem will come pre-leveled to the level of the area that dropped it.
So this is awesome. So if you look, skills are broken up by the class. And I think all the question marks are just ones that, they're not showing for the gameplay demonstration. And they're broken up into tiers, which probably is just character level or how far you've progressed or something. But my understanding is that you can just scroll through all the different character classes and unlock any skill you want every time you get an uncut gem, and that's really cool. Like, I think that they said they're going to take away gem vendors, basically. Like, they're just going to be gone, because you want to have those items that give you what you need. You want things to be drops, because that's how gems were initially intended to be used. And yeah, like, it's just your ability to grab an uncut gem and then say, what does my build need the most right now, and to get that exact thing as long as it's available to you is really nice.
So it's a lot easier to change between skills in PoE 2. This time, I think it might be cool to grab one of our meta gems. Meta gems are skills that can have other skills socketed into them, changing how they work. In this case, we're going to select Cast on Shock. Now, let's equip this thing in the skill screen and choose a spell to trigger with it. I think Comet might be fun.
Alright, so here's the skill screen, which I don't think we've seen yet in this video. So what they've basically said is that you have a certain number of skill slots overall, and that these gems, like the support gem sockets, are on the skill gem itself, and that they each start with 2. So every time you unlock a new skill and put it in your skill bar, you have 2 support sockets for it to start, and then you're gonna find, and I think it's some type of jeweler's orb, and that jeweler's orb will give you a guaranteed upgrade to adding add another support socket to it. It's not going to be blowing through 350 jewelers to try and hit a 6 socket. Now, they said you'll have to hit higher and higher tiers, like you'll have to get higher and higher tiers of these jewelers orbs to drop, but every time you get one, it is a guaranteed outcome. And they said that that's how most currency is going to work, in terms of your sockets and like socket colors and your chromes and things like that. You are basically just, as long as you have the currency, it's going to do what you need it to do. And I think that that's, again, a really amazing thing. I think that it's really good to say, I need this item for my next upgrade. And when you get it, you know you have that upgrade. Rather than just saying, I'm going to grind for 5 hours or whatever, get a bunch of this item, and hopefully out of all those items that I've gathered, I'll get the outcome that I want. Even if it takes me a little bit longer to get this item, knowing that once that item drops, I have my desired outcome ready to go, I think that's much more satisfying, and it's going to be a much better system. Plus metagems. Metagems are awesome. So metagems are going to be our reservation skills, our cast on crit, and, cast on melee kill, all those types of skills. They're going to be their own thing. They're going to be capable of being 6-linked as well, and you won't have to tie them to things. I think that if they have cast on crit, it will just exist, and any crit will trigger the skill. It's not going to have to be, well, I have to link an attack to it as well, plus the cast on crit, plus the spell, and take up a bunch of sockets that way. Everything's a little bit more freeform, and it's really nice. As you can see from this one, which is, what is it? It's cast on shock. And so he just has the cast on shock in its own slot, and then in one of the support gems, he has the spell Comet, and we'll see how it works here.
Because Cast on Shock reserves Spirit, we'll need to first disable our Arctic armor. We have to decide if we'd rather have the extra defense or the extra offense of the Cast on Shock using our Spirit. In PoE 2, trigger gems use a system of filling up cast time on each trigger. Basically, if a skill has a short cast time, then we'll trigger it really often. If it's got a long cast time, like this Comet here, it will take a lot longer to trigger. You can see up the top left.
So that's the balance of that, is that in order to trigger gems, in order to trigger skills, you need to fill up a bar, and that makes sense. That way you can't just throw like a triggered meta gem on and throw a bunch of spells on it and just have stuff constantly raining down from the sky.
There's a counter that says how far it is until your next trigger. And there you are. Using Cast on Shock, we'll automatically cast Comet whenever we're using our lightning skills. So we've found the generator. Time to power it up. As power is restored to the Mechanarium, all the constructs are coming back to life. We'll need to fight them on the way back to the charged Soul Core. One thing that PoE 1 players might have noticed is that this character has both ice and lightning spells. That's pretty inefficient, isn't it? It's a big no-no for most builds, because any specialization into cold or lightning isn't going to affect the other element. And generic elemental damage increases are not going to be as powerful as focusing on a single element. Well, in PoE 2 we have another major new system to introduce to solve these kinds of problems, and it starts with weapon swap. Now in PoE 1, weapon swap isn't really used much for its originally intended use case. We imagined that people were going to be swapping in and out between different weapons to deal with whatever situation they were in. People just don't do that at all, and a large reason for that is because
Yeah, no one in any action RPG uses weapon swap unless it was some kind of shenanigans to abuse a mechanic. In MMOs, it's a little bit more prevalent, I think. But yeah, no, I don't think I'm not aware of builds in Diablo 2 or anything that use weapon swap. I could be wrong. I'm my information's out of date, but yeah, it's one of the maybe the most underused mechanic in an action RPG.
because it's really awkward to do. In PoE 2 we wanted to solve that. The staff Octavian is using here has an ice mod on it that makes it great for when he's using his ice spells. We would also like to be able to make sure that the build works just as well for his lightning spells. If Octavian equips his previous staff in his second weapon set, you can see that it appears on the character's back. Now we're going to open up the skills screen. If Octavian opens up the skill options for his lightning skills, you can see here that you can choose which weapon sets are usable with each skill. First, we uncheck set 1 from being used by his lightning skills.
Having a stat breakdown for each skill is also really nice, like that little whole information tab. And yes, assigning skills to specific weapon sets is just beautiful.
Then we go through the cold skills and turn those off with his lightning weapon. Now, when we use Spark, the character will automatically switch to the lightning staff on his back, and then use the skill. When Octavian uses Ice Nova, his character automatically switches over to his ice staff before using it. Figure each skill for which set to use, or both if you don't mind which. There's a very short time penalty to switching, so it can be good to leave some skills on both sets, if it doesn't matter which weapon set you're using.
I think they did say that there are ways to decrease that swap time between the weapons as well. So you could basically make it so that you don't even notice it, I would imagine.
But we still have the problem of passives. Wouldn't it be nice if we could specialize in both cold and lightning passives on the character? Well, in PoE 2 you can. We're on the passive skill screen here, and you can see that we're close to both a...
So I'm not going to pull a different clip just to talk about this, but in the trailer they talk about how the passive tree has 1,500 nodes. I think that's more than the current tree. The tree is clearly very different, and actually during one of the interviews that I watched, I think it was Subtractum's, they say that there is no life on the tree. Like right now, any life-based character in PoE takes something like, I don't know, 20, 25 life-based nodes. You want to get to up to about 150% or more of increased max life from the tree, and there's just none of that on the tree in PoE 2. The game is balanced around you just getting life on your gear and then getting other defenses from the tree. And I think that's going to do wonders for build variety, because you're not going to feel pigeonholed into taking life for every single character. And you'll be able to go, where you want to go on the tree instead of feeling like you have to do that. So I think that's really awesome. Assuming it's balanced properly, of course, but, time will tell.
Cold and a lightning cluster. At the top right of the screen, you can see where we have some weapon set specific points to allocate. If Octavian holds shift, he can allocate set 1 to the cold passives, and then allocate set 2 to the lightning passives. Now check this out. As we weapon swap, our passive tree changes from one build to the other automatically. Whenever we cast the appropriate spell, the character's passives reconfigure on the fly to the correct build for that spell. Now you can't do this with every passive on your tree. Only points granted from skill books will allow this kind of dual specialization, so you can't change from a mace-slamming warrior into a fire elementalist with the press of a button, but it certainly increases the number of options you have for builds. There's a huge number...
That may be one of my favorite new mechanics. Anything that, again, provides more build variety is a great thing. Just being able to mix and match different elemental damage types or different skill types, the weapon swap, all of that lends itself into this new system of building a character and playing it the way you want to play it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's still going to be plenty of ways to brick your character, and you can't just mishmash a bunch of things together. It's still going to take some skill, but saying, hey, I want to use a fire skill and a lightning skill, if you build it right, that's going to be possible. And I think that's a very important element of progression that PoE 2 needed in order to sort of take itself to that next step, that next tier.
Number of places where the system can shine. You could augment your Dagger Shadow build with traps, or have a great curse setup on your Witch in one spec, and then move to your Chaos Debuff spells with the other. It really opens up your options.
I need more time.
Another fun meta gem to try out is called Barrier Invocation. This works a little bit like the trigger gem I talked about before, but this one charges up as your energy shield is hit by monsters. I think we might like to put an Ice Nova in this one. The more energy shield you lose, the more charge builds up until the point where you're able to cast the skill you socketed instantly. Lose some energy shield, and then at just the right time invoke Ice Nova to cast all the stacked up versions in one cast. If you keep losing shield, you'll build up even more charge for even more casts, so it's a great defensive option in an emergency. Here we are, back at the charged Soul Core. All we have to do now is take it. How hard could that be?
Love those power strips on the ground that light up red with all the different symbols, the Val symbols as you go through. And I love that the Val civilization is something that continues to return to the game and is prominent throughout PoE 1 and PoE 2.
Oh dear.
Now, was anybody surprised that turned out that it's going to be a boss fight? I wasn't, but you know, it's not a bad thing. Like, it's funny because it is. Everyone knew it was going to be a boss fight, and you would sort of expect it to be.
Now we just have to remove it from that construct. I'll, that to you.
Get back! Death comes! Your fate is sealed! Stay still!
So that's Path of Exile 2.
All right, just some closing thoughts on this that the videos didn't cover. PoE 2 is going to be its own game. It's grown big enough that they didn't want it to be a patch for Path of Exile anymore, because it would fundamentally change the game way too much. But they've said that everything that you've spent money on, you get to keep, and that they're going to continue to support both games, and that anything you purchase in one, you can use in the other, with some occasional exceptions, they said, if it's like a very specific cosmetic or something along those lines, which I'm fine with. I'm a little bit concerned about my ability to, play both games and play staggered leagues from both. I probably won't. I'll probably just move to PoE 2 and stay there, which I'm fine with. I hope that the team is at Grinding Gear is able to support both games effectively and to release large content and balance updates. But overall, like, Exilecon was amazing. The footage of PoE 2 looks great. All the mechanical changes, which is my bread and butter, I love that kind of stuff. They all make really good sense and add amazing quality of life, build variety, and everything I would want out of a sequel. So I'm super excited. The closed beta starts June 6th of next year, 2024, and I absolutely can't wait. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I want to thank you all for being here with me today, and I'll see you next time.